Good day. A short time ago, I did a program for this channel in which I discussed the sweeping advances made by the Taliban in Afghanistan as the United States withdraws its troops from that country, with the Taliban gaining more territory than even its own commanders expected. Over the last few hours, we've received more reports of the same nature. They speak of a collapse of the Afghan military in Kandahar province, most of which now is slipping conclusively under Taliban control, and of the Taliban chasing Afghan troops across the northern border into Tajikistan, where they have been forced to surrender to the Tajik authorities. Tajikistan being, by the way, one of the former constituent republics of the former Soviet Union, with the Russians continuing to maintain a significant military base and troops there. So we see a major, all the indications of a major Afghan military collapse, and with Kabul itself becoming increasingly isolated and surrounded as more and more Afghan territory slips under Taliban control. All of this, of course, has come at the same time as the United States itself has withdrawn its troops from Bagram, the great air base formerly built by the Soviet Union way back in the time when the Soviets were established in Afghanistan in the 1980s, and then taken over by the United States and made the main center of US military activity following the war the United States waged against the Taliban in 2001, which resulted in the first collapse of the Taliban regime. Well, all of this picture of collapse and failure by the Afghan military, and all these reports of more US pullouts from the country, have come alongside reports in the British media, specifically in the Daily Telegraph, that the British intend to maintain a unit of special air service troops in Afghanistan on an indefinite basis in order to train up the Afghan military. Now, I ought to say that these reports, which have appeared in the British media, especially in the Daily Telegraph, come shortly after that mysterious document dump in a bus station in Kent, which I discussed in a recent video, and which was connected to which was mainly connected to the incident between the Royal Navy and the Black Sea, and the Russians in the Black Sea. This document dump also alluded to this deployment or retention of British troops in Afghanistan, supposedly on a training mission. We're not told how many troops there will be, but the reasonable guess is that we're looking at a couple of dozen, perhaps a few more than that, but no more. And I ask the question, and I ask it seriously, what are these troops supposed to achieve? What difference are a couple of dozen or a couple of score or even a couple of hundred SAS troops? And the SAS, by the way, is not a big organization. What difference is it going to make in Afghanistan, where the Taliban possess perhaps 90,000 fighters, and the Afghan military is disintegrating, and the United States is pulling out? All of this seems to be predicated on an assumption that the Afghan government and Afghan army will somehow hold together after the US withdrawal. Increasingly, that is looking unlikely. Other European countries, like Germany, for example, have withdrawn their troops from Afghanistan in preparation for the coming collapse of the Afghan government and army as it tries to cling on to Kabul and as its attempts to do so look increasingly forlorn. But the British, on the contrary, as we see, seem instead to be digging in. This has a look of it of being part of that same pattern of British attempts to try and assert themselves around the world, in the Black Sea, in the South China Sea, where the HMS Queen Elizabeth II, one of our 2 aircraft carriers, is now due to sail, and in all sorts of other places, as the British government engages in its illusions that Britain is once more some sort of global power. This is utterly misguided. It's not as if we return to Afghanistan, the British have not had plenty of history there already. Of course, there were the 2 disastrous Afghan wars of the 19th century, but arguably those happened long ago, even though they in both cases resulted in disastrous failure for the Victorian British military at the height of Britain's empire and power. But perhaps more pertinent is the complete failure of the British military mission in Afghanistan, launched there by the Blair government after the events of 9/11, and especially after the British had failed in their defense or their attempt to control Basra in Iraq following the joint US and British invasion of Iraq. As I very well remember, as the British at that time pulled out of Iraq and Basra, humiliated and driven out by the Iraqis, they redeployed to Helmand province in Afghanistan, with the Blair government at that time claiming ridiculously that there was no certainty that there would even be any British casualties there. Well, it turned out very quickly that there were, and I remember watching in despair at that time a British news documentary broadcast on British television showing British troops moving aimlessly, as it seemed to me, from one village to another in Helmand province, surrounded by Taliban fighters and unable to achieve anything of significance except get themselves killed. And in fact, more British soldiers were indeed killed in Helmand province, and the situation there got so bad that eventually, as had previously happened in Basra, the US had to send its forces to Helmand province to rescue them. So after this debacle in Helmand and in Afghanistan, one might have assumed that the British would want to steer clear of Afghanistan and keep away from there, not go back in at the time when the Americans are themselves withdrawing. Well, not at all. Instead, we learned that British SAS troops are going to be sent to Afghanistan to train the Afghan army, which, as I said, is in the process of disintegrating and collapsing, and whose troops are increasingly fleeing the battlefield. This is a disastrous pattern of meddling and overactivity in all sorts of regions of the world. Now, I am somebody who actually has a high regard for the British military, though I also believe that it has been wildly overstretched over many years and severely weakened by the extravagant adventures enforced upon it by the Blair government. And it needs time to rest and reorganize and rebuild itself after these various failures. But regardless of that, it is surely the case that Britain is no longer a great global military power. Sending aircraft carriers to the South China Sea, sending British destroyers close to Crimea, sending British SAS troops to Afghanistan at the time, the very time when the Americans are withdrawing and the Afghan government is collapsing, is not clever. It doesn't enhance British influence. It does not give Britain greater leverage and greater influence in world affairs. It simply sets Britain up for more disaster and more failure. I understand that Boris Johnson has still not signed off on this latest British folly of sending troops to Afghanistan, though the Daily Telegraph says that it is a done thing. I hope that wiser councils in the British military, and I presume there are some, and in the British government, the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence will prevail and will persuade Boris Johnson to put this latest folly behind him. The sooner we leave Afghanistan with the Americans and our European allies, the better it will be. Afghanistan's future is no longer in our hands, and realistically, it never was. The countries that will now have to sort out the mess that has been left by that reckless intervention in Afghanistan, hatched by Bush and Blair all those years ago, will not be us in Britain, or even, it seems, the United States. It will be the neighbouring powers. Russia, China to some extent, Pakistan definitely, Iran indisputably, the Central Asian states also. And it will also have to be done in association with those forces in Afghanistan which have real strength and power in the country. The Taliban is one of those. Perhaps some of these northern militias are also. The Afghan government, which we are supporting, quite obviously, is not amongst them. So let us leave and put this sorry chapter of our interventions, launched upon which we were launched as a result of Tony Blair's misguided and reckless policies, behind us once and for all, and concentrate instead on those pressing problems within our own country, which we need urgently to deal with. Once we quit Afghanistan and leave it alone, my guess is that some sort of diplomatic and internal peace will be established, given that the Taliban themselves must be war-weary and anxious to consolidate their victory, and they've already hinted that they're more than willing to work with the outside powers in order to achieve that. But that is no longer our problem, and we should leave it all behind, and we should forget about Afghanistan and all these other post-imperial dreams which have brought Britain nothing good, and which threaten instead to bring us to a further debacle and to eventual humiliation. Well, thank you for joining me for this program on this channel. I look forward to you joining me in future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also remember to check out Alex's channel. Please also check us out on our new platforms, BitChute, SuperU, ODYSEE, and Locals. And please also support us to the extent that you can via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar, and by coming to our shop and buying the amazing things you will find there. On this particular video, I am, as a British citizen, drinking from a magic mug, a Duran magic mug, with the flag of Britain. And please also check us out. Check out the other things you will find on that in our shop, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, our hoodies, our hats, and all the rest. And last but not least, if you like or perhaps approve of this video, please remember to check tick the like button and to check your subscription. And thank you for joining me on this program, and I look forward to you joining me again, and have a wonderful day until then.